and then you can take it from here. Before I pass this off to our speakers today, I would like you to tell you about a bit about early growth. Here is a quick description of what we do. We're an outsourced finance and accounting firm. We work with early stage companies, helping them with everything from day-to-day accounting to financial forecast to taxes and valuation. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelist, Matt Stapleton, CEO of Capshare, who will tell us a bit about themselves and kick off today's discussion.
Thanks, Patty. And just to make sure, Patty, can you hear me just fine?
I can.
Okay, awesome. Hey, all. So I'm excited to be on today. We go through, this is definitely a topic that I've become rather passionate about. So we've been working on Capshare here about 7 years now prior to that, we ran a 409A valuation firm. And so this has definitely been kind of a big focus for me the last 10 years or so. We work with early growth with a lot of companies, kind of helping them with their cap table needs. Capshare is pretty squarely focused on the software side, so while we've got support and help for a lot of things on that side, the early growth team helps out from kind of a services perspective with, I know, a bunch of their clients, and so that's been worked out awesome for us. We've got about 10,000 companies in the system, and probably we'll be going through today, and we'll get to the agenda here in just a second, but we'll be going through a lot of the kind of common pitfalls that I see companies run into early stage that end up costing them a lot down the road. And these kind of come from, we as a group see, I don't know, 300 or 400 extra cap tables each month. And then all end up getting involved in kind of a subset of those, but these definitely come out of just being able to see kind of cap table after cap table with different companies and how they organize things. And so hoping I can help you kind of dodge some of those pitfalls, but that's a little bit of kind of my background there. And Patty, if you want to jump in and kind of go over this overview, or should I just kind of take it from here?
You can take it from here.
Okay, awesome. And in fact, because we're going to get into the software a little bit as part of this. So let me kind of take over the screen share here. I'll throw that into presentation. So, all right, so I want to talk about what's unique about early stage equity management. What is so different when we're looking at that for like an earlier stage company? And then I'll go into kind of the most common pitfalls, challenges that I see for those companies. And as we talk through those, we'll talk about ways to avoid them. Most of it's just awareness. I think for most people, if they know this is a big thing, it costs people a lot, just knowing that and avoiding those can be awesome. And then we'll kind of get into the Q&A here. Like Patty said, I think we've got an hour scheduled. I've got some time past the hour if the Q&A needs to run long. But we'll just kind of go through and see where we end up. All right. So I wanted to talk about kind of uniqueness when you're managing your cap table early stage. And obviously early stage is a little bit subjective, but there's definitely a time in the company's life where things are more valuable. And during that stage, kind of early on, is when a lot of the biggest problems will come out. So I've got this kind of, it's only going to get more complicated on the cap table stuff. One of the biggest things that I see, and Capshare is actually my third company that I've kind of founded and gone through to an exit with. And so I've seen this process where early on you don't want to spend money. You don't know necessarily even if your idea is going to pan out. There's so many things that are more important than kind of compliance and financy type things when you're just trying to validate whether the team's going to stick together and whether the idea is going to work out, all of that early preliminary stuff. And so spending a lot on legal to get your org structure set up, a lot of those types of things is really hard to do early on, but it's kind of ironic because for the company that grows fast, any mistakes at that early on are going to end up being really, really costly. So the, I don't know, 10 grand that you might save up front ends up potentially quite frequently turning into like $1 million problem. So you'll hear that from a lot of different groups just talking about like set everything up right from the start. Cap table's not an exception to that. There's a lot of resources to help you do that well up front without having to spend a lot. Capshare actually has a free tier if you have less than 20 shareholders. So really, there's no reason you can't get that organized, get access to some of our auditor alerts and things that'll catch some of those early problems for you. And then once you've grown to the point that it makes more sense from a cost perspective, we'd love to pick up there, but there's free resources that can absolutely help you kind of early on to make sure that you're doing everything that you need to. So let's dig into those challenges. And so I've gone through this deck with a lot of different groups. We'll go through it with a lot of incubators, and I've kind of tailored things and cut things out in the past, but I found the 4 things that most consistently come up that I see early companies having problems with tend to be the 4 things I've listed here. And so I've got a slide dedicated to each of these. I'm not going to read them out right now, but this is where I intend to kind of spend the rest of our time today, is just talking through nuances on each of these problems and making sure that you know kind of what your options are for taking care of them. So the first one is vesting. So for anyone unfamiliar with the term vesting means when you give an individual a grant. It can either be options in your company or common stock. And while you give them a much larger grant, the shares in that grant only become officially theirs based on either time. So over the next 4 years, these shares vest, and that's where that term vesting kind of comes in. Or it could be a milestone. So you could say, hey, here's 50,000 shares. You actually get to keep these when you help us raise our Series B, or something similar to that. And so you'll see, here's kind of a screenshot from Capshare's app where back in September 2017, this individual received 500,000 shares on an option grant. I can see a chunk of vesting that happened kind of that same day, looks like 1/4 of that. And then we've got additional vesting that's happening kind of each additional month. So as months go by, you'll see an additional chunk of these become invested until eventually this entire grant is fully vested. They're technically the right of that person. They get to keep that. That's not something that you can take away from them. It's a way to incentivize someone. Most often it's time-based vesting, so most often it's a way to incentivize someone to stick around. And there's lots of different vesting schedules. This is something that I don't think you need to get too creative with. In the private market, by far the most common vesting schedule we'll see is where 1/4 of the grant vests after a year. The other 3/4 then vest monthly for the next 3 years. So it's 4 years of total vesting. You've got an upfront chunk, and that's to protect you so that you don't get someone who starts and then 2 months later they leave. They've got this little chunk of grants of shares from the 2 months that ended up vesting that you then have to include them in shareholder notices, and there's administrative costs. There's just a lot of reasons that it's nice to like, hey, let's make sure that these people can stick around for a year. It's the most common we see. I see a lot of variations in investing. So there's definitely room for flexibility there. The one thing where I see this being the biggest cost by far for an early stage company is if no vesting is applied upfront when for the original founders. And so often founders will say like, well, I'm starting this company, I shouldn't have to vest. And I definitely get that, and that may be fine if there's kind of one main founder that by far owns the majority of the company. But if you've got two founders where one owns 60%, one owns 40%, or 3 or 4 founders, I'll see, and this, I'll run into this at least every other month, especially with like a company started out of a college class where you've got 3 people who worked together on a college project, ended up actually getting excited about it, wanting to make a company out of it. They each own a third of the company. They work on it for the next year and a half, and then graduation comes, and one of them goes to PwC. Ends up taking kind of a more traditional job. And they never discussed vesting up front, and so now that individual owns a third of the company. Even with dilution and everything, it's really hard to dilute that big of a stake down to the point where it's not going to be really costly. And that can be painful, and I've seen funding rounds not get done because they'll often call that dead weight on the cap table. So big chunk of shares that isn't proactively working on making things progress and building the business going forward. A lot of investors will say like, yeah, I'm not willing to put my money into this and make this guy rich. And I know that you guys are going to be disillusioned and have a hard time carrying on with this big stake. So I think I'm going to pass. And obviously that's not always going to be the case, but I've seen deals that were kind of on the margins anyway, where this absolutely affected the deal. So something to keep in mind, the conversation can feel a little like a prenup up front, which everyone's like, no, I love these guys, we're going to be together forever. But it's just smart to make sure that, and if you do the vesting right, that person can still have a chunk of the action. If you did that 4-year vesting and someone stuck around for a year and a half, they'll have a sizable chunk. But being able to get back the other 2.5 years worth of stock and redistribute it to hire someone new, that's going to be huge. So this, of all of them, I'll move through the other issues a fair bit faster than this, but of all of them, this is kind of counsel that I give over and over and over. If you've got multiple co-founders, it's smart to have that vesting in place. And definitely make sure that it's in place for those first early hires who are going to have large grants. Because it can hurt. On Capshare, for example, we were pretty good about this when we started the company. We were good about the vesting for the most part. We still, even with the vesting, we probably had 3% of the cap table all in when we sold last year that was dead weight. And of that, there was one particular individual that kind of represented, I think, almost 1.5% and had left 4 or 5 years before the acquisition. And it hurt cutting those checks as part of that to that individual. And I was happy for them, but I had other people on my team who'd been there kind of the whole time, but had got in a little bit later when the grants were a little smaller, that I would have loved to distribute that out to. And that was just a 1.5% position. Had that been, 8, 9, 10% at the time of the exit, that would have been really painful. So that's
Matt,
kind of my story on the vesting. Yeah, Patty.
sorry, I'm just gonna interrupt you for a second. I know there's some background noises. It's not typing, it's just we're having some issues with connections. So
Okay.
please bear with us.
Awesome.
Continue.
Apologize, guys, if you're getting any of that on my side. See if I can adjust here, talk a little bit more directly on my mic, but let me know, Patty, if the audio ends up being a problem. Okay, let me jump to the next one here. So the next early one that I see really regularly is non-papered promises. So I'll work with a company that's been kind of at it for 5 months. They might be midway through an accelerator or something like that. And I get more or less this quote really regularly where we'll have someone mention, oh yeah, we promised John 3% to help us get these contracts. And he got us the big one, and then he had to go somewhere else. So we told him we'd give him 1.5%. And that all the time, those types of promises are expressed in percentages versus shares, and that can be really ambiguous. So if you can express those in, oh, we promised John 20,000 shares, that's going to be so much better just there. But having a contract around these, having some sort of agreement around these is really, really important. These are the types of things, I mean, the movie The Social Network, a good chunk of that, some of the issues Facebook ran into early on were these types of things. And there's lots of kind of big newsline stories about this type of thing where someone comes out 7 years later with a promise around a percentage, but now that percentage means something very different than what it meant, early when the company was being founded, and this causes problems. So I'd say I know there's a lot of law firms that will do a lot of their early contract work either really discounted or even they'll waive fees, push them back, charge them as part of a more mature round so that you don't have to worry about those fees up front. There's a lot of templates online, good templates. There's groups like, I know Clerky has a lot of good templates. Oric has their startup library with a lot of good ones. So there's some of that can help if you really need to keep costs down. But getting these types of agreements in paper, getting them onto the cap table, is going to be really, really beneficial just to keep everything clean. And it's tricky because you hear these stories and you think about kind of horror stories of people really, really angry at one another. And I'll give you an example on one of the companies that I worked really closely with. I had a really close personal friend who we started things kind of just over an informal agreement, largely around percentages. And then things took off really fast. The company did well, and suddenly it became much more important that we got those formalized. But at that point, with them not formalized, devil can be in the details. And we realized that some of the terms around vesting were never discussed. We talked percentages, or whether those percentages were before the new round that was suddenly really aggressively coming in, or after, and so there was a lot of these things, and we worked through it, but it was stressful and straining on what's a really, really, really close relationship. And so getting the details all clarified will help, whether it's that negative, you're now absolutely enemies, or close friends, just having these things spelled out really clearly is going to be a big help. Next one I'll talk about is competing equity records. Early stage, a lot of companies will kind of initially organize an Excel cap table along with a lot of PDFs that are in a lot of different places. And then that Excel cap table will get passed around a little bit, and pretty quickly you'll find that founder has one version, attorneys have a different set of data, and your main VC is kind of tracking something else that's maybe 4 months old, making decisions on that. Getting this all organized can absolutely help. And shameless plug on that, Capshare does a great job. Like I said, I don't feel too guilty. It's free early on. Capshare can definitely help with this, but there's a lot of systems. There's several great systems that can help you keep this stuff organized. And I'd say getting that organized up front is going to be a huge help. Having one system that your attorney and your VCs, everyone can access the same set of data will be helpful. Being able to put those paper docs somewhere so that you can reference them right related to the actual grants, that's going to be huge. So this is another one. I've seen issues with this. I was talking to the head of legal at a large public company that does quite a bit of acquisition work, who mentioned they had to pass on an acquisition because after due diligence, everything looked good. They were excited about the tech and everything. But there were 7 or 8 versions of the cap table where the CEO's version had option grants that he'd issued, but weren't on the legal version. And as this acquirer looked at it, they ended up passing on the deal just because the liability, they kind of estimated looking at it and everything. They said, okay, we're going to pay $40 million on this company, but we're also looking at our liability here. We're going to have to set aside another $8 million in escrow just to be sure, insure us against kind of potential people coming out of the woodwork post-acquisition and things like that. And I don't think it's worth it for this particular company. So I've absolutely seen that late stage just around kind of not keeping this information organized. The last one I wanted to talk about is compliance. There is a fair bit of cap table related kind of compliance items that can end up being big deals. I wouldn't expect you to memorize everything on this list. Several of these aren't going to matter until a company is more late stage. What I would say on the early end of the spectrum, I'll go through this list really quickly. My goal here going through the list though is to give you enough buzzwords so that when an issue comes up 2 years down the road or something like that, you can say, that sounds like something that Matt was talking about on that webinar. I'm going to go Google it. And that's kind of about the level of expertise that I'd expect on here. I'll highlight the issues here that are more near term. The first one is 83B election. Anyone in a private company that's expected to grow much bigger than it kind of is up front, who has vested stock. So this is not options, this is vested stock, likely wants to file an 83B election, and that needs to be filed in the first 30 days after that vested stock is granted. So this is a pretty early stage one, and it can be costly if you don't. So if you don't file that, the IRS will basically tax you on that stock as it vests. And if 3 years from now, you have 100,000 shares vesting each month and they're worth $1 a share, without an 83B election, the IRS would be taxing you as if you're getting 100 grand in compensation each month. So that can be really bad. So if you've got vested stock, 83B is something you're going to want to dig into a lot more. ISO 100K limit, I'm not going to worry about it a ton. ISO is a type of option grant. And if you're granting options worth more than 100K invested stock each year, then you potentially are going to run into this one. Basically, if you have option grants going out that are kind of legitimately worth more than 100K, you should go freshen up on the ISO 100K. Rule 701 compliance. Similar type thing. If you're granting more than $1 million worth of stock to employees in what's called compensatory grants, so compensation, you're granting more than $1 million a year or anywhere kind of close to that, you should review Rule 701, brush up on this, and get a better idea of what the Rule 701 limit includes. Stock option expensing. Since these options so often are compensation to employees, the government wants those included as a form of compensation on your P&L, and the math to do that can be really complex. I'd say usually on this one, you don't need to worry about it until you're thinking about getting audited financials. So if you don't have audited financials, you're not seeing those as anything kind of near term, you can kick that one down the road. Rule 3921, once you have people exercising their options, you should look up Rule 3921 because there's potentially a filing and a report back to the individual that you need to make at the end of the year with your tax stuff. I think 409A, this is going to be a big one kind of across the board. If you're granting options to employees, the strike price on those options needs to match the fair market value of your common stock. And basically, if you're granting stock options to people, you need to get a 409A valuation. Those don't have to be super expensive. Early stage company, it's typically like $1 to $2 grand. Most places I see, kind of $1 to $3 grand, depending on kind of the quality. Lots of options there, but I just dig into that deeper. If you're looking for looking to issue options to employees, that 409. And that covers the big kind of pitfalls that I'll often see. Overcoming those, keep things organized. I will kind of after this, I want to jump into a 5-minute overview just to give you a sense of kind of what Capshare looks like, where it can most help. Like I mentioned, we've got a free option for anyone with less than 20 shareholders. So for a lot of early stage companies, they can sit quite a while on that free option and get benefits out of the software that'll help with a lot of what we were kind of just discussing. So let me jump into that here. There we go. All right, so this Timpanogos Inc., this is a fictitious company that I've got inside Capshare. First logging into the system, I see different shareholders on the left side and different classes of stock on the top. So in this particular company, I've got common stock, seed and Series A would both be what's called preferred stock, stock raised, raising money. So company raised money, issued seed, and then their Series A round. And then we've got an equity plan, which is options set aside so that we can issue them to our employees. And Capshare just helps keep all of this organized. So at the most basic, I can dig in, I can click on Mamie here, for example, and I can see everything that she's ever been issued, either her common stock or her options, any legal docs that I've uploaded to the system, I can see those tracked for her different grants here. I can see overview information on this particular individual on the side. If I had something just related to Mamie, maybe not one of her particular grants, the documents tab here will let me kind of upload those main items. And then Any changes that I need to make in the system, I can do kind of all of those up in here. So if I need to edit any of the contact info for her, I can do that. If I'm terminating her as an employee, this will kind of walk through that. At its most simple, this is a good chunk of what Capshare is tracking. But a lot of the kind of nitty gritty, okay, now I need to track a vesting schedule, all of that's here as well. We just wanted to kind of stay out of your way until you needed it. And so if I click on this like OG16, a particular option grant, then I can get an overview that says, okay, back in 2015, this was issued. Here's all the vesting since then. I can get in and see really quickly, and this is that typical kind of 1 year 25%, monthly after that. If I need to do anything like now exercise this option grant, which is when an individual is paying their strike price in order to buy the stock related to the option, so then they'll have common stock, not options. This will kind of walk through that. And then with all the cap table information in here, there's a lot of other kind of tools and toys. I'm not going to get into them here, but there's things for document automation, and we can help with if you want to run a, hey, if my company were to sell for 20 million, who would get what? Kind of all of that type of what if analysis. And hey, if I raise this round, what would that look like? That's kind of all built into here. But that's a quick overview of kind of the things that can help with some of these core issues. Like I mentioned, we work with early growth a lot with companies, and so the other, you can get access to kind of all of this on the software side, while having early growth actually help keep it all organized, which can be awesome just to help out. If you need anything direct from us, we're really good at helping on the chat here, so you can get quick direct access to our team. Anyone on our team, you're talking to someone right in our office here. It's not this big call center. All these people are really, really some of the sharpest people I know on equity stuff. And so you can get really good help there as well. So that's kind of quick overview on the software. And I think with that, yeah, let me jump into presentation. I think with that, I'll just mention following this link, and we'll share these slides as well if you just want to follow it that way. Requesting a demo through there will waive any upload fees if you want us to help upload your data into the system. So we can help get kind of everything uploaded off of, if you've got an Excel file or anything right now, happy to help out with that for free. So I'd say feel free to request that, a demo if that would be helpful. Reach out through that. We'd love to help out. And yeah, I think from there, got a few more resources. This will probably be more useful in the actual slides that we send out, but there's some good blog posts here just to help with a lot of kind of what we talked about today. Early stage things there. But I think with that, and I'm probably running a little early, but I think with that, we're coming into the QA. So Patty, I'll let you jump in if you've got anything. And anyone, if you have questions in the kind of webinar controls, should be an area where you can ask those. And then we'll kind of go through. We may not be able to get to everyone, just depending on what's coming through, but I'd love to kind of walk through any of your questions that you have right now.
Perfect, Matt. So I'll ask the question and then you can go ahead and answer them. I don't understand this question very well, but it says all 4 dates are the same. Are they supposed to be different?
That's probably something when I was in, when we were kind of walking through like the demo of Capshare. My guess would be something related to the vesting here. Typically you'll notice there'll be like similar days of the month, but typically we'll see progression on the actual kind of month to month on that vesting. If I'm butchering your question though, ask again and we can kind of come back around that. If you can want to clarify that, we'll make sure that we get you a solid answer there.
Perfect. Just to remind people, we will be sending copies of the webinar, the recording, and the slides. Then we have, where can those equity/agreement templates be found? Matt mentioned 2 names.
Yeah, so repeating those, and it was pretty off the cuff, just groups that we've worked with in the past, but I believe Clerky, CLERKY, has a pretty good library of templates if you're kind of interacting with their service. The other is Oric, has a set of, I think they're the Oric startup forms, set of templates they've released online as examples. I know plenty of lawyer friends that would very quickly jump in here and, you know, one, do the general, like, I'm not an attorney, don't take anything I'm giving as legal advice. Two would say, hey, you got to be careful with those templates, especially the biggest thing that I know a lot of them will note, mixing and matching templates can be really dangerous. And so grabbing one document from Oric and then Googling broadly and picking out another document from there. I know the Oric startup forms are meant to kind of complement each other and use similar definitions of terms. That's not the case if you use things from different places. So I'd be cautious there, and I know a lot of attorneys would jump in and say, like, hey, we really are, like, for awesome companies, we're happy to kind of waive fees up front to make sure you do it right, and they'll kind of counsel you away from those. But those are ones that I've heard a fair bit in the past if you are looking for some Clerky and then Oric's startup forms.
Perfect. And then someone else is asking, can you grant early options without a 409A?
It's a good question. So 409A comes from the tax code. So it's section 409A from, I think it's IRC 409A from the tax code. And in that section, it says that your options have to be granted with a strike price that matches the fair value of your common. How you receive that how you get to that fair value of common is up to you. And there's a few methods kind of mentioned. So you as a board can agree on what your common is worth and skip needing to perform the 409A valuation. We published, if you search for like Capshare free 409A, we have a 409A calculator online. That's a quick and dirty kind of way to back in the envelope estimate a value. Any of those methods, though, if the IRS ever in your future questions your 409A, they can point to that 409A and they can say, prove to me that this number is right. And the burden of proving that the number that you came up with was accurate for that time is on you. If you get an independent valuation firm to do the 409A for you, then that flips, and the IRS then has to prove that your 409A price that you came up with is grossly unreasonable, is the language in there. So the biggest benefit of going and getting a 409A valuation firm to do your 409A for you is just that flips. At that point, the IRS would have to come in and say, no, I think this is kind of way, way, way wrong. And for an early stage company, for them to find enough data to be able to really justify that is going to be extremely hard. And so that's kind of what you're buying. It's almost like paying for insurance, but that's kind of what you're buying with that 409A.
Thank you. So another question is, what if you have outside legal and VCs who have also keep cap tables on their end? Would you expect that they know all use this cap table software as well? Or is this just another version, but one you have control over?
Good question. Great question. Depends on your individual relationships. I would say particularly on the outside counsel side, I think we're up to a good 70 to 80% of law firms have paralegals internally trained on Capshare. So they are generally quite amiable to work with Capshare if that's where you request. If you request like, hey, I want you guys to use Capshare on this, and then just you guys can even have the edit access. Just give me view access to the data so that I can get quick access and I can run what if analysis. Most law firms are really familiar with that model and are familiar with our software. On the VC side, there's a little bit, I mean, to be honest, there's a little bit less penetration around Capshare, but you're generally just giving them view access anyway. And they're not usually really like editing things and needing to be deeply familiar with the app. They just want to be able to look up and be able to kind of check out that the shares that they believe that they have match the shares on the cap table. That they've got some of that high level information. And so that one I would say is a little bit less important, but most of the big VC firms, we work with a lot of big VC firms that will absolutely be familiar with Capshare as well.
Perfect. Our next question is the platform more focused on companies rather than VCs? If also targeted to VCs, can it handle convertible notes, waterfall analysis, and or modeling of future equity rounds?
Yep. Yeah, I'd say yes to all of those. I would say we are more focused on the individual companies, trying to help them out than necessarily building for the VCs. But let me just give you an answer to that one because we've got a little bit of time here. Let me give you a quick look. So in Capshare, your VC firm, this is a fictitious firm, but your VC firm can absolutely organize their holdings across multiple companies and see things like invested capital and what the company would have to sell for them to get their money back and that type of information across their full portfolio. So there's definitely functionality for the VCs, and there's also all of the scenario type things that you mentioned. And so I can come in on my Timpanogos Inc. and we have the waterfalls, and it's doing all the math in the background so that I can come in here and I can really quickly say, hey, if this company were to sell for 20 million, who would get what? We'll think for a bit, and it'll go through and it'll kind of give me distributions of what that means for each of my individual investors. There's also our financing round tool is just a quick back of the envelope tool that'll help do things like, hey, if we were to raise 10 million on a 40 million pre, what's that mean the price per share is? You can include, you asked about support for convertible notes. We absolutely can track all of the convertible notes in here. I can convert them in as part of this round, and Capshare will do the math around cap, or if there's a discount rate or anything like that. So Capshare can definitely help with all those things.
Thank you. Next question. If we had a co-founder who vested about 2.5% of his common stock before leaving the company, should we try to buy back their shares before raising money and or getting acquired to clean up the cap table?
Good question, and let me just kind of repeat it back and see if I got it fully, and feel free to ask again if you want to clarify anything. So I've got an individual, they vested kind of 2.5%. I wasn't sure if that was of their shares or of the cap table overall, but I don't think it changes my, sorry, go ahead.
His common stock, of his common stock.
Okay, I mean, guessing that's of his shares. Depending on how much of the cap table that is, I think you're fine. There's no reason that person has to sell. I'm always a fan of like, hey, if you can buy back some of that dead weight on the cap table, then by all means, that'll keep things cleaner. That type of amount outstanding is not going to take around at all. The types of problems that cause actual issues is when you've got a co-founder that owns 20% of the overall cap table and is completely gone, and you're now out there trying to raise your Series seed or whatever. That can cause problems.
Sorry,
yeah,
just a clarification. It says 2.5% of the cap table overall.
Got it. Yeah, 2.5, like I said, that shouldn't cause any legitimate concerns around investors. Anything north of 5, I bet you'll get questions about. And anything north of 10, I think you'll start having a couple serious questions. And nothing, I mean, there's nothing that it's like, oh, that will 100% every time torpedo the deal. I've seen technology spun out of other companies where the old company is completely not involved but owns 80% of the cap table, raise money. And so nothing here is kind of an iron fast, absolutely the only kind of how things will be. But 2.5% doesn't scare me.
Perfect. So we have a couple more questions. I'll try to ask as many as possible, and then people can just email Matt directly. So to start the clock for the 30-day filing period for the 83B election, when does that start specifically? When the board consents the granting of shares, or the effective date that the share agreement was entered into?
That is a good question, and I'd say I see lots of companies that kind of don't fit the norm, but I'd say typically the grant can't be entered into until after the board has approved them. I'll see times that the grant is entered into with language around like pending board consent. The later of the two will start the clock though, typically. 83B is never something that I want to like push on, and so as I say that, I go back to the like, I'm not an attorney, check with legal counsel, you know, don't hold me to it, but typically a grant isn't considered issued until both of those have happened. So it'll typically be the later of the two that'll start the clock around the 30 days for the 83B. That's one though, the sooner you can get it in, the better. And then Patty, are you there?
Sorry, I was muted. They
good.
have a question. They have a question about Capshare. What training comes with Capshare?
So we will, depending on the company, if we help with an upload, then we'll go through, upload your data. We'll then prepare and send you back 2 files. One of those files will be a kind of audit checklist of like, this looked good, we didn't have this, and so we had to make an assumption. And then we'll also send you an export of your file where we've highlighted the cells that are like, hey, I didn't have what you issued, the dates that you issued your common stock for, so I've highlighted those here. You can update those and then we'll correct them. After that, we're happy to jump on a call with you and walk through the system. And then from there, happy to jump back on the phone if you need us. The chat ends up being huge for a lot of our users, just because you can chat in and say, all right, I'm looking at this equity plan. I don't understand how exercises are showing up here. And we'll get back to you within like 1 or 2 minutes, be able to give a very direct response to that. That tends to be huge training. We're actually working right now on putting together a set of training webinars that will just rotate through like 4 or 5 topics specific to training. So that's something that we want to do just to kind of make that more robust. Generally, I've found for most people, just having the chat so available with sharp people there, and then you'll also have an account manager assigned to you that you can ask any questions. Most people, that kind of gives them what they need in the system.
Great. And then we have one last question. If you guys have any questions in the next couple of minutes, please let us know. If not, you can email us later on. So our last question is, what if folks did not file the A3.B with SEC? I don't know if you answered this already.
Yeah, I'd say call an attorney. It's
Okay.
worth it to take the time to kind of figure it out. And I've known companies that have completely blown through 83B filing deadlines. I've done it before. It can be really bad, but the sooner that you deal with it and just work it out, the better. And different attorneys have different creative ways that they resolve that type of thing. Like I said, if you don't have vesting on your common, 83B isn't a thing anyway. But if you've got legitimate vesting on your common stock, and you didn't file the 83B, that's one that I'd say, yep, just spend a little bit of money, bring it up with an attorney and talk through kind of what you should do.
Perfect. And then I think it would be great if you can provide them with a little bit of your input of why it's so important to have like a good lawyer before you start. I've seen some really, really bad agreements that people sign. So what is your opinion on that?
It's one of the lawyer in particular is one of those odd things where I know I've been in a situation where I'm like spending money out of my own bank account to get a company off the ground. And spending real money, $2,000 kind of with an attorney, it sounds extremely expensive, especially when I'm trying out this idea and I don't have any revenue and I have no idea if this is actually a business. So I've been in that situation and I know the pain. On the flip side, not spending the money up front will cause major issues. And if you want to be the next unicorn, or forget that, if you want to be a company that 5 years from now ends up selling for 20 million or anything like that, you want the opening stuff done right. And so I see a lot of people that just avoid the work entirely. I see a lot of people that go to their, I don't know, their divorce attorney brother-in-law to get paperwork worked out for their tech company that they're wanting to go out and raise money for. So I'll see issues there where kind of the language, not that the language is necessarily bad, it's just invented and not standard. Where it's kind of like you came up with what's actually an okay agreement, but it's going to cause a lot of people to kind of scratch their heads and isn't going to take into consideration some really common things. So I do think getting a good attorney up front is critical. I think whatever your kind of geography is, finding the group in your area, and there's usually one or two or maybe a couple more, but there's usually a couple main groups that have a solid corporate arm that's familiar with tech and venture. And getting someone like that to put your stuff together early on will be a major benefit. I think spending the time with them up front will absolutely pay off later on. And like I said, a lot of them will waive or delay their fees. And just kind of sharing an example of that personally. And if there's any other questions after this, I'm happy to run through those, or we can kind of end here. But sharing an example personally, at Capshare, we got a good attorney up front. It was a solid office, but they didn't do a ton of kind of tech and venture stuff. They were based, our main office is here in Utah. And that was, they had several offices, but their main one was here as well. And they did fine. but there were a few mistakes and a few things that got missed. And I think up front we paid them, I don't know, $6,000. So something kind of in that range. And then when we went through our exit, we had been burned on a few exits in the past where we kind of hadn't paid for a good attorney and ended up really hurting for that. And so we spend a lot around our exit and said, no, we're getting a really, really good attorney, paid in called in a few favors, and ended getting the head of the M&A practice for Latham Watkins to run our acquisition. And it was night and day how much they covered for us. I'm fully convinced that they paid for themselves in spades. But we paid a lot, kind of on the order of like $500,000 there. And I bet their fee would have been a few $100,000 less had we used someone better up front. And so just kind of mentioning, it's one of those things where you don't have the money up front, you have the money later on. I don't know what the right answer is, and I think everyone has to kind of make an individual decision on that. But I know a good attorney can absolutely be a major, major help.
Perfect. And Matt, those are all the questions. Do you have any last advice for people that are growing their companies?
No, I don't think so. Good luck, guys. I'd say my personal email is matt@capshare.com. Hit me up if I can help on anything. If you've got other follow-up questions, the chat that I kind of showed you earlier follows us everywhere. And then let me just go back up in the slides here. Let me camp here for a second. Anyone that does want to kind of get a demo and kind of go into more details about their situation, we'd love to help out on that, and just see ways that we can help and bring it up as well. Like I mentioned, we work with a lot of companies where we work in tandem with the rest of the early growth team, and that works out awesome for us because you end up getting much more personalized service than you'd get directly from us, just since they're helping out so much from a services perspective, and we're kind of focused much more on kind of high volume tech type scenario. So do bring it up with them. We love working with all the rest of the team on the early growth side. And yeah, let us know any way we can help out.
Perfect. Once again, we will try to send this recording and the presentation in the next 48 hours, and I will add Matt's email there so you can reach out to him personally. Thank you, Matt, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time.
Bye.